In the past few episodes, we've focused on haunted locations in South Korea. Some places are labeled as haunted because of unexplained incidents, while others may look completely ordinary but still leave people uneasy because of what once happened there. But the truth is, paranormal events don't only happen in specific places. Sometimes, they appear when people are most relaxed and least guarded. In this episode, we're shifting our focus to a different kind of story, a personal encounter shared by Korean actor Ji Jin-hee, told by himself on a television program. Even today, he has said that it's an experience he still finds frightening whenever he thinks back on it. Ji Jin-hee isn't someone known for telling ghost stories, nor is he the type to casually share private experiences. He has long been seen as a calm, rational, and low-key figure, and is widely respected in the Korean entertainment industry as a serious actor. The incident we're talking about today is something he personally brought up during a show. He has also said that this was not a memory he could laugh about. Even though many years have passed, he still describes the feeling of that night as deeply unsettling. After the story aired, it sparked a lot of discussion in Korea. Some people found it hard to believe, while others felt the details were too vivid to be completely made up. The story dates back to a period when he traveled to Hong Kong for work and stayed there temporarily for a filming schedule. He didn't mention the name of the hotel he stayed at, only saying that it was a local luxury hotel. From the moment he landed, his schedule was extremely busy, and after a full day of work, he was both physically and mentally exhausted. By the time he returned to his hotel room that night, it was already late. Nothing felt unusual to him at first. The room looked normal, and the atmosphere was no different from any other hotel. Since he had filming work the next day, he had no plans to go out. After a quick wash, he decided to rest early. When he fell asleep, he was lying on his side, facing the empty half of the double bed, with his back toward the floor. At that moment, he believed he was completely alone in the room. Not long after falling asleep, he began to feel that something was off. He was still lying on his side when he suddenly felt a clear sensation near his lower back and hips. It wasn't strong, but it was distinct. It didn't feel like pressure from the mattress, nor like an unconscious movement of his own body. Instead, it felt like something was repeatedly poking him. At first, he didn't think too much of it. He assumed he might simply be overtired and experiencing a physical illusion. He didn't bother getting up to check and only adjusted his position slightly, trying to fall back asleep. But even as he tried to ignore it, the sharp, uncomfortable sensation didn't go away. Instead, it became more noticeable, as if someone were deliberately repeating the same action. As time passed, the feeling shifted from mild discomfort to irritation. Ji Jin-hee later said that at that moment, he wasn't so much frightened as he was annoyed. He began to wonder whether a staff member or colleague had somehow entered his room, and even felt that whoever it was had crossed a line. In that mix of doubt and irritation, he slowly decided to turn around and see what was happening, a decision that would mark the true beginning of the incident. But the instant he turned around, all of those assumptions collapsed. Standing beside the bed was not anyone he recognized, but 6 completely unfamiliar and unsettling figures. Their bodies resembled those of humans, yet their faces could not be clearly identified. Each face kept changing, sometimes clear, sometimes blurred, as if none of them could settle into a fixed form, creating an instinctive sense of discomfort. What frightened he even more was not just their appearance, but the strong sense of presence they gave off. He was certain these 6 figures were not hallucinations, because the feeling of being watched and surrounded was overwhelming, tightening his entire body and impossible to ignore. As he struggled to understand what he was seeing, one of them suddenly spoke, calling his name in a voice he knew very well. The tone was casual and familiar, as if they had known each other for a long time. "Jin-hee, come play with us." That single sentence marked the moment when the situation shifted, from something he couldn't understand into real fear. When he heard the invitation to come play, he rejected it almost instinctively. Later, He explained that there was no time to think about whether he should agree or not. There was only one overwhelming thought in his mind. He absolutely could not have any further interaction with them. At the exact moment he refused, one of the figures in front of him suddenly seemed to become agitated. Without saying a word, it lunged toward him in a violent, uncontrolled motion and pressed down on his body. He described the sensation as being pinned by an enormous, crushing weight. His entire body was immobilized. Intense pain spread through him instantly, as if countless sharp objects were piercing his skin at the same time. He couldn't even scream. His mind was fully conscious, but his body was completely out of his control, forced to endure the pain. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally long. He had no idea how long he was being held down, only that the experience went far beyond anything a normal nightmare or hallucination could explain. At one point, he even began to wonder if he was going to die in that hotel room. Just as he felt he could no longer endure it, the pressure suddenly vanished. What followed was a single sentence, spoken in a cold, almost impatient tone. "This isn't fun at all." After those words, the 6 figures standing beside the bed made no further movements. One by one, they slowly drifted toward the window and disappeared from sight, as if they had never been there at all. The room fell completely silent. He was left alone on the bed, unable to immediately tell whether what had just happened was reality or an unusually vivid nightmare. After the incident ended, he didn't get up right away, nor did he have the courage to check the room. He simply lay still on the bed, listening to the silence return, repeatedly confirming to himself that he was awake and that he was still alive. That night, he barely slept at all. Every time he closed his eyes, the blurred and distorted figures standing by the bed would reappear in his mind. When reflecting on the experience later, he repeatedly said that what frightened him most was not the pain of being pinned down, but the fact that they had invited him to join them. He believed that if he had agreed out of fear, curiosity, or even a moment of hesitation, the outcome might have been far beyond what he could survive. Because of this experience, he also began to rethink the kinds of stories he had once seen in news reports and online forums. Stories about people being lured by unknown entities and then suffering accidents after leaving their original location. In the past, those stories may have sounded absurd, but after that night, he could no longer view them so lightly. For Ji Jin-hee, the incident did not fade with time. Instead, it became a memory that could not be erased. Even today, whenever he talks about it, he emphasizes one thing. Sometimes, refusing is already a form of self-protection. What has been discussed most about Ji Jin-hee's experience is not what he saw, but the issue of language. The incident took place in Hong Kong, yet the voice that spoke to him, and even called him by name, was not human. This raised an obvious question for many people. If these beings were local, how were they able to communicate with him in a language he understood, and even use the voice of someone familiar? Some believe that if the story is true, it suggests that such entities are not limited by human language, or may not need language at all to understand people. Others argue that the language details, being so closely tied to Ji Jin-hee himself, make the experience feel more like a perception created by a psychological state. Ji Jin-hee himself has never tried to explain this contradiction. He simply described what he experienced that night as it happened. And because of that, the incident remains difficult to clearly define even today. After Ji Jin-hee's story, let's briefly look at a few Korean folk beliefs about dealing with paranormal experiences. These practices don't necessarily prove that ghosts exist, but they do show how people try to protect themselves when facing things they can't explain. First, after listening to ghost stories or paranormal content, many Koreans will lightly pat their shoulders. According to folk belief, spirits like to linger near a person's shoulders to listen to stories related to them, so this gesture is meant to brush them away. Second, when sleeping, chairs should be pushed in properly, and blankets should not be pulled completely over the head. It's believed that an unattended chair might invite something to sit and watch you sleep, while covering the head entirely could cause a spirit to mistake you for someone who has already passed away. The last belief relates to wardrobes. In Korean folklore, the space between the top of a wardrobe and the ceiling is thought to be a place where spirits like to stay. For this reason, many people try to fill that space and avoid leaving it empty. That's where we'll end today's episode. This was the paranormal experience personally shared by Korean actor Ji Jin-hee, along with some related discussion and folk beliefs. If you're interested in stories about Korean celebrities or paranormal tales from different parts of Asia, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to let me know whether you think this story was real, or if there may be another explanation. See you in the next episode.